Hello and welcome to Movie Joust. My name is Jesse Nussman, a film critic living here in Atlanta, Georgia. And with me on the other line, he picked poor Robin clean. It's Mr. Josh Sewell.
How's it going?
Guys, listeners, I know it's been a while. We've been juggling some schedules. Several of us out of town, out of the country, then becoming sick. But we're Josh and I are now here. We're Jason-less because Jason is over in Japan, I believe. But in the weeks since we've been on the pod together, what a movie has come out. Sinners is now taking America by storm. And Josh, give me your general feelings on the movie as well as kind of like the reception to it and kind of like how it's been stewing in your head in the last couple weeks.
Yeah, so Ryan Coogler back, saving cinema. So, not to oversell this thing, but I feel like it's been a while since we've had a movie that is A, relatively original, B, really, really good, and C, that it's hitting pop culture in a way that it feels like we don't really see that often anymore. Everybody is so sort of segmented with their entertainment choices that, you could have like memes and in-jokes for movies and TV shows that you've never even heard of, And so to have everybody making the same, jokes about, Irish jigs and,
spitting in Michael B. Jordan's mouth.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say Haley Steinfeld being freaky, it's refreshing. And it's especially in a relatively lackluster year for movies so far. I know a lot of years, get off to a rough start, but the fact that we've only had, I would say, 2 genuinely great movies, and it's almost May, I've been like, uh-oh. And so...
Yeah, I've been trying to, like, catch up with some stuff that I've missed of just, like, I don't know, maybe Magazine Dreams, is that really that good? And then, like, watching it and being like, wow, what a slog. But, I agree with you. It's exciting to have something like this out in the culture and, just sort of... I'm trying to think of what the last thing that would have come out that just sort of, like, for lack of a better word, the normies around me have been kind of just sort of like, is that good? I really want to see that. And just sort of feeling like a general excitement and enthusiasm about a movie being out. I mean, can you think of like what would have been that for, like, I guess last year, like there were a bunch of people, like, I know Deadpool and Wolverine was a big hit, but like, I know last year I had people asking me like, I don't know, is Civil War that good? But that was more of a, like, grotesque curiosity than, like, this, which seems like a real enthusiasm of, oh, I don't need to know, like, 18 issues of comic book lore. I liked Black Panther, and I liked Creed, and I love Michael B. Jordan, and this is, a Southern set vampire movie. Like, but it's so easy for people just to sort of, like, hop on and get interest in it.
Yeah, I think, honestly, you may have to go back to... I mean, if we're talking, like, pure culture-absorbing blockbuster, maybe, Wicked, and if you go back earlier than that, Dune
true.
Part 2.
Yeah.
But, because you have stuff like... I mean, Mufasa made $1 billion, but I don't feel like anybody was talking about Mufasa.
I feel like that was a real, like, we gotta get the kids out of the house sort of situation.
So yeah, and so for the fact that the last one was Wicked, and even not to dog John Chu and all the ridiculously talented people behind Wicked, but Wicked also had like 2 decades of like Broadway reputation behind it.
Yeah.
For Sinners to come out and do the kind of business it's doing just on the back of, I like this guy as a filmmaker. Ryan Coogler hasn't let me down yet, and we love Michael B. Jordan. And I think it's really hitting because it's the constant industry thing of underselling, underrating black films. I feel like if you look at box office results, they always, underestimate the power of that audience to go out and see movies where they can see themselves on screen and it not be like a superhero, that it's a real person, we can discuss the whether vampires are real people or not. But but to see characters who are actual human beings with actual problems and actual human desires, like everybody wants that, but especially a demographic that is constantly underserved.
And I think there's something to, this is a movie, it is a popcorn movie, but it is a popcorn movie for adults.
Absolutely.
And it being funny, this coming out, like I was vacationing in Greece, and it being funny hearing the stories about like the Minecraft movie back here at home, and then like everywhere. Josh, you have no understanding for just like that movie. That seems like that was like the only movie that was out in Greece, because it was just like that the one movie that's just like advertising was everywhere was the Minecraft movie. But then like hearing these raucous and having a little bit of like, I have zero interest in that, but a bit of myself being like, well, at least we're not hiding that like this is a children's movie made for children, like with in jokes for children and stuff like that. We aren't needing to be like, when are we going to get the serious Minecraft movie that is going to deal with America's collapsing economy and deal with stuff like that? It's like, and they have like Sinners come out and be like, yes, adults, here is your blockbuster that you can have, and people warmly wrapping their arms around it has been really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I feel like one of the best things financially for Hollywood has been the idea that like this movie has to appeal to everyone, and you're like, yeah, that makes you money until you make your films. I was gonna say at some point it did, but like the fact that you have to water it down so much that literally 10-year-old girls and 80-year-old grandpas can all understand the movie, like that just leads to bland generic storytelling.
Yeah, and it's that quote about like, if I typically hear it like referred to in terms of politics of like, if you're for everyone, are you kind of for no one sort of
absolutely
thing.
Yeah, and so to hopefully, fingers crossed, be reaching a point where studios are realizing like, oh, we can just make a lot of different movies. Like we can say, hey, here's a Minecraft movie that is clearly for people under 14 years old and under.
Yeah.
And here is Sinners, which is for teenagers and grown-ups. Or late teens and grown-ups, coming from the same studio, as much crap as we've given Warner Brothers over the years, to have them both coming from the same studio and seeing them both dominate for very different reasons, I think that's healthy. Am I a Minecraft movie guy? No, but like I'm not gonna dog them for making it for the people who are,
right?
Because they also made Sinners for me,
Right. There's no kind of like trying to be like, well, adults, you can enjoy. We need the Minecraft movie to also be, applicable for like people like us that are going out to the movies. And I don't know. I've just been. How has this movie been sort of like stewing in your head? Because like I went and saw it like a couple days after it came out with my girlfriend, because was out of the country for the press screening. And it was a pretty packed audience. Everyone was really like raucous and rowdy. And we walked out just being like, what an exciting, thrilling time at the movies. And then in the weeks since seeing it, it's just, I keep finding all of these new layers to it, and it's so exciting to like have someone like Ryan Coogler, who is so obviously has interest in being kind of a populist mainstream filmmaker, but yet also has this sense of ambition to everything that he's doing, in that there's a way you can read this movie that it is, an allegory about the appropriation of black music by, like white executives or like white artists. There's a way you can read it as this sort of like cautionary, like American folk fable about the allure of sinful pleasure and the dark consequences of that. You can even read it as, this movie about, well, now now the third thing that I had written down has escaped me. It'll come back. But, it is a movie that has so many different The other thing I was going to say is like there even is a way you could just sort of read it as like this is a allegory just about like music as like a cultural concept, and the idea that like music connects our present to our past and our history, and the way that sort of music gets sort of reinterpreted and influences what comes after it in the coming years. But also like the vampire aspect of it could be like, but if you have certain talent as a music, there are people that want to sort of leech off of that talent and want to sort of like suck you dry for monetary reasons. And it's just been so fascinating that like, this is a movie that, as we said, like is a really thrilling, sexy time at the movies that, you know, just the excitement my girlfriend and I had when we were like, and it's also a blues musical.
Right,
You know,
exactly.
I mean, of like, they aren't even advertising that part of it, but like there is like a large stretch of this movie that really is, it's a musical. But then also like being able to just sort of like over dinner and with friends sort of talk about like, oh yeah, you can kind of read it as this or read it as that. And no one interpretation, I think, is right or wrong, but it's exciting that Coogler has the ambition to, even when this movie kind of like gets a little messy towards its end, I'm sort of willing to forgive it because it is offering so much sort of both visceral pleasure as well as sort of like meat on the bone for me to kind of chew on in the days and weeks after seeing it.
Yeah, it completely accomplishes the thing I complain about a lot with movies, which is I would rather see a flawed movie that like aims high but doesn't always quite get there than something that like, yeah, it technically checks all the boxes, but who cares?
Yeah.
You know, like I really like messy movies that are trying to be something, and like is Sinners perfect? No, but even the stuff that doesn't quite work is still really fascinating for the reasons it does and doesn't. And it you know, it accomplishes that task that, you know, I talk about a lot with my students at school. It's like, you know, a lot of the audience is just like, I want to go see a movie where Michael B. Jordan looks good and kills some vampires. And you're like, this movie is for you. And but you're also like, oh, but this also could be a controversial movie where they talk about the weaponization of Christianity as like, you know, colonizers perverting it to make everybody, you know, the same as them. This sort of this homogenization of cultures under the umbrella of you have to adopt what your conquering country tells you to adopt. Not everybody wants to have that conversation, but it's there if you want to have it. And so I love that it can be the same movie, but like you were saying, everybody can come away with it reading something different and nobody's technically wrong.
Yeah, and it just makes me, you know, really... I just keep going back to, like, how much it makes me extra value Ryan Coogler. And, like, I've been thinking about, in the days since seeing it, kind of his place in kind of, you know, one of my... maybe as the millennial on this podcast, one of my sort of, like, weird fascinations has been, like, who are our, like, current, like, millennial generation of filmmakers? And like, how are they sort of figuring out a way to, like, how are we separating who are the real kind of like auteur artists of this millennial generation in Hollywood, and how are they trying to sort of navigate and do their own work within this sort of like very corporate studio system that has kind of been dominating? And I would say like Coogler and Greta Gerwig currently are the two people that seem to have like best figured out a way of like, I could kind of, you know, this is an original movie that is really like Ryan Coogler's blank check project, to coin a term from another podcast, but would not have come if not for him finding a way to essentially do a Rocky sequel and then to do multiple Marvel movies. I mean, I'm less into the second Black Panther movie. That's maybe an example of maybe his ambition sort of like not quite being in grasp. with that movie.
And
but,
and to be fair, he was also making that movie with two hands tied behind his back as well.
Right.
Like,
I remember the reception to that movie was sort of like, he did about as good of his job as he could have done with the what he was given. But a guy who's figured out how to tell personal stories about things that he is specifically interested in.
Right.
And have these franchise movies feel like they're coming from a very personal, singular voice, and then now being able to leverage that into I get to do my own original movies. And that kind of seems to be the space, as much as I would love another original movie from Greta Gerwig, that seems to be the space that Greta Gerwig is now moving into. Of like, I remember when her Little Women was announced, it being like, do we really need that? And then being shut up, of being like, oh wow, she had like a very singular take on this story that she wanted to do. And then the same thing happened again with Barbie, and that becomes such a big phenomenon. And as much as I'm just sort of like, do I really want her doing a Chronicles of Narnia movie? There is like the voice in the back of my head that's like, she's proved you wrong like twice before. Like, don't hold out on her.
Yeah, not only that, like you were saying, like, she's doing it in ways that it's kind of like both her and Coogler are doing it in ways that it's almost like we're aware of their talent and potential, and it's almost like we're holding them to a higher standard. Because I remember when Little Women came out and everybody was like, really? Must we do this again? And you're like, well, the last one was 30 years ago, and we've had like 8 Batmen since then. And nobody asked that about Batman. Right. So, and so with Ryan Coogler as well, it's like, do we need another vampire movie? I know when this was announced, it was like, Ryan Coogler's first original movie is taking on vampires, and people were like, well, are vampires original? And you're like, well, vampires aren't, but the way he's using
those people don't know how to have fun. When I heard that there's like Ryan Coogler is doing a like southern set vampire movie where Michael B. Jordan will play twins, I was like, sign me up.
Yeah, already done, ticket bought. But I think another thing that is catching people off guard with Sinners, and one of the reasons for its success, is we live in a very asexual cinematic landscape.
I'm really glad you brought up this point.
This is a sexy movie. Like, I've seen other people be like, this, like, people don't realize how horny this movie is. And it's almost like we've, as a culture, forgotten that movies can be that. Because I think you were in the same press screening I was. There were several scenes in the film where it's not that what they're saying is like pornographic or anything, but just the fact that they were being sexual made the audience go, like, you heard gasps, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
and
I wasn't at that press screening, but definitely my like normal audience, people, that you can feel people kind of like lift up a little bit in their seats. And I'm glad you brought that point up, because that is something I've been thinking about in the last few years, and thinking about it a lot last year with movies like Baby Girl and Queer, even though I was less wild about that movie, or Challengers, even though that's not a movie, as I think we've coined on this podcast, like the tennis is the sex in that movie.
Right.
But of like, that is a movie with a lot of like sexual energy, and there is something to kind of what you were saying about like when, it gets back to the idea of this movie of like, if you're like making something for everyone, like what sort of like niche pleasures are you sort of eroding from culture? And this idea of just sort of like, all the conversations about like how sexless are blockbusters or just sort of our mainstream American movies are in general. And that being even such a contrast to kind of like what's on TV and stuff like that. And I agree with you. I think that those reactions people are having to that is sort of this kind of like, oh, I forgot you could have this kind of, you could play with that kind of emotion.
Yeah.
That an audience can have of like, we are very sexual creatures, like deep down, and you can play with desire, and you can play with like this very integral part to the human experience in your movie, even if it is just sort of to like elicit a little bit of just sort of like goosebumps from your audience of like, oh, okay, are they going to go there?
Yeah, and it's like it's called Sinners. Like, you can't call a movie that without addressing the kind of sins people find themselves drawn to. Like a lot. I'm trying to think. You've got 3 very specific aspects of sexual scenes in the film, and 2 of them involve women characters who are married.
Yeah.
And so not only is it the sexual nature, it's the forbidden aspect of it and the consequences and repercussions of what happens when you dabble in the forbidden aspects of that world. And he's
I think
not
there's
doing
even like
it.
a racial aspect to it too.
Yeah.
I mean, like the movie is set in the 1930s, and there is this sort of like dread hanging over of the Klan and of the racism of the time, and the sort of violent consequences that were sort of thrusted upon minorities, and especially people in the black community at that time. And there is an aspect to kind of like, even though I think the Haley Steinfeld character is supposed to be mixed race, she's passing as white, and so there even is an angle to that of just sort of like the one brother played by Michael B. Jordan being like, I have this like really insanely beautiful, sexy white woman essentially who is throwing herself at me, and like I want her, but also like if I get caught entangled with her, I'm the one that's gonna get I could face some violent consequences because of the the time and place that this movie is being set, and that adding this sort of extra sense of dread to it is another layer that I think makes this whole movie so interesting.
Yeah, and it's to kind of wrap up this aspect of the conversation, it's gotten so standard with me that like my daughter is 14, almost 15, and she saw a trailer for it, and I was like, well, yeah, it's R, but if you want to like the R rating has sort of changed what R means from like when I was younger. I've gotten used to just like basically PG-13 plus R movies, and so I was like, well, if you want to come with me, you can come with me. And like after this scene with Michael B. Jordan and Haley Steinfeld at the train station, I'm like, I'm so glad my daughter stayed home. Like this would have been a really awkward, uncomfortable screening, and it just reminded me like, oh right, movies used to actually be rated R, and that's not something to like brag about or condemn. It was just like, no, sometimes movies are made for more mature people who can handle these things, and they don't have to be for everybody. And I think the fact that some filmmakers are starting to remember that is really refreshing.
Yeah. So I'm sure we'll talk more about Sinners as the year goes on, because it really seems to be kind of like the first like real like movie phenomenon of the year. And I don't know about you, I haven't heard a single person in my life that has seen it that has not at least like walked out being like, that was a rip-rolling time at the movies. Like as you said, maybe they're not having the sort of multi-layered conversations that we're having about like themes, but they're coming out being like, the guy who made Black Panther did like a really cool version of From Dusk Till Dawn with Michael B. Jordan in it, and I had a great time.
Well, and that's the other thing too, like to go back to what you were saying about millennial filmmakers, is to hear these interviews with Ryan Coogler going like, oh yeah, my primary inspirations for this movie were From Dusk Till Dawn, The Thing, and Puss in Boots, The Last Wish. You're like, yeah, sign me up. That sounds great.
It is weird now. It's a real sign of I'm getting older, that people being like, oh wow, I guess that was like 30 years ago at this point that like From Dusk Till Dawn would have come out. And which even brought to like another like hilarious conversation like with my girlfriend on the car home being like, yeah, that was very similar like plot. I mean, I think this is a much more rich movie than From Dusk Till Dawn is.
Oh yeah,
but
absolutely.
Like telling her, be like, yeah, it's very similar to, there's this movie from the like mid 90s about, that's like has a similar idea of these two criminal brothers that sort of wind up at this club that then is like infested with vampires, and like having to explain to her too, like, and the two people are George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino in a very weird specific period of time where like Quentin Tarantino was like, I can also be a movie star, and America was like, no.
Yeah, it's like,
No.
can you really?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's and even down to the structure, you're like, it's this kind of movie until halfway through, and then it becomes a very different movie. So yeah, very excited to see movies from decades ago, which again sounds crazy to say that, but that were clearly influenced by other things, seeing those influences evolve and become, things that we think are refreshing, even though they are, chopped up references of other films. The fact that they're presented in this way makes them seem fresh and creative and original.
Yeah. So let's kind of wrap up at the second half of our episode and kind of like looking ahead to the summer. How are you feeling kind of just sort of like gazing on the summer movie calendar? Because I took a look a couple nights ago, and I don't feel like terrible. If anything, I kind of walked away with like a very objective sort of like, well, at least we won't be talking about the same thing every week on this show.
Right. But it did kind of make me laugh that we're like, oh my gosh, this cool, unique, creative. So next week is Thunderbolts.
Yeah. Which I don't really like to because I'm trying to be more of a critic now, where I'm like, everyone, if a movie really clicks with you, good for you. I don't want to bully people but like I kind of did like groan a little bit and chuckle to myself when the first Thunderbolts reactions were coming out, and it was all people being like, finally the first Marvel movie to tackle America's mental health epidemic, and me being like, oh my god, that sounds insufferable to me.
Right. Not only that, but like Iron Man 3 was all about PTSD.
Right. And also being like, I don't buy that. I think if that's your takeaway, then like it's time for you to get a Criterion Channel subscription. You know what I mean?
And I, as somebody who really does try to go in, like you said, I try to give every movie the benefit of the doubt. Nobody wants to go in saying like, well, I bet the next 2 hours of my life are going to be a waste. Like, nobody wants to feel that way.
Yeah.
But everything I've seen about the movie, despite the fact that I love Florence Pugh, I love Academy Award nominee Sebastian Stan.
Yeah.
Going back to
love Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Yeah,
but
everyone
in that cast, I love. I don't know about you. My hesitation with that, and this kind of like can get into like the first little inklings of our summer movie conversation.
Yeah,
this is really like one of 3 big comic book movies. Like I can feel that like in the last couple of years we've gotten a lot of like big comic book movie bombs. I don't know if this is like this is going to be a real test year. I think Thunderbolts is sort of void at this point. Like, whether good or bad, it seems like Marvel is trying to market it as like, it's not a Marvel movie, guys.
It's an A24 movie. Yeah.
Right. And like, I don't know how much of that is sort of like a fun troll versus on the like cult of A24 versus like Marvel seriously being like, we're in a bit of a brand crisis at the moment, and this is more kind of like in line with the kind of movies that we've been making in the last 5 years, and we just need to sell it as something else to get people to see it.
Whereas, I don't think it's an accident that the trailer that came out before Anthony Mackie Captain America and the trailer after Anthony Mackie Captain America are so different.
Yeah, there's just something kind of confusing about the marketing. Like, I think the last day I was in Greece, they switched all of the Minecraft posters to Thunderbolts posters, and someone in my friend group was like, why is it a Wheaties box? And I like couldn't explain to them like why. I was like, I don't know. I think it's obviously trying to be funny, but like I don't get what the joke is
or who the joke is for.
Right. But like, so if that movie just sort of seems like, a write-off, for lack of a better word, of just sort of like it'll be what it is.
Yeah.
Like it
feels like they're already pivoting towards Fantastic Four already.
That's what I was gonna say, is like that feels like the one that Marvel and Disney are like, we need to put all of our energy into this, and of like, if this works, we're covered for like the next several years. If this doesn't work, then we're in like real crisis mode, which I think is also the vibe going on with the Superman movie over at Warner Brothers is like we've put a lot of chips down into like, here's round 2 of trying to do the Marvel thing, but with the DC characters, and maybe the James Gunn sauce is more tasteful for audiences than the Zack Snyder sauce was. But
which is interesting to me, like to connect the two films. Thunderbolts, to me, looks like Marvel trying to do Suicide Squad, which was a movie that didn't work twice for DC. Now, granted, the James Gunn version was way better, but
yes, that one I'll give of like, that was a pandemic thing of like, no one went and saw that because that was during the pandemic.
But the fact that like you have a studio going, okay, let's do a version of a movie that audiences have already rejected twice, and do it from a studio that they already are feeling burnout on, feels really concerning to me. And I feel like James Gunn, like you said, is in a similar spot where he's like, okay, I tried the Guardians formula with Suicide Squad and it didn't work. Was it the pandemic, like you're saying? And it feels like Superman is his first real not crisis, but his first real sort of like challenge point that he's had in a really long time.
So let's kind of first start off with a question I want to ask you, which is like, what do you think is going to be, let's start positive. What do you think is going to be the big movie phenomenon of the summer? Of like last summer, I think, it was undeniably, even though I like detest that movie with every bone in my body, like Deadpool and Wolverine, giant hit. I even feel like among just sort of like chit chatter with people, Twisters kind of became like the big thing last summer. What do you see as being kind of the big movie that's going to own summer 2025?
So part of me wonders if it's going to be something like Mission Impossible, which they have been really billing as an Endgame style wrap up. And so I know audiences are really tired of never ending sequels. And so I wonder if the sort of novelty of finality is going to drive them to make this Mission Impossible a success where the last one wasn't. Part of me wonders that, and then the other part of me wonders, like, is it something that we're not even thinking about, like a Lilo and Stitch or a How to Train Your Dragon? Are we getting the Minecraft thing again?
Yeah, I was maybe going to answer this with, like, a conservative answer of, like, I think it'll either be because the other big hit of last summer was Inside Out 2. And I think there still is something of like children's movies in the summer are like, that's a real slam dunk for Hollywood if they can figure out how to sell it. And I think you're probably right that the Lilo and Stitch movie and the How to Train Your Dragon movie, even though, live action adaptations of animated movies that, we've lamented that issue like so many times on this podcast, but I still think those movies could be huge hits if for only then like we got to get the kids out of the house sort of thing, or like, and my kid loves rewatching Lilo and Stitch. My kid loves rewatch. I mean, you have kids, how it is. Of like, I wouldn't be surprised if. I would love Mission Impossible to be huge. That's probably like the blockbuster I'm most looking forward to this summer. I don't think that movie will perform badly. I think has there been a Mission Impossible that has been like a $1 billion phenomenon? Like, they always do well. I think the last one like didn't do well, but only because it like costs so much, which could also be a case of, I think like this new one is another like huge like $300 million mega budget movie. But I think there's good vibes for that franchise, and I'm not worried for that movie, even if I don't know if I would love for it to be the phenomenon of the summer, but there is a little bit of me that's like, but those movies have never been like in-game levels phenomenal.
Right.
Like they've always been successful, but they weirdly do better overseas than they do here in the States, if that makes sense.
And I feel like there may be some like added goodwill to this one because, you know, for people like me with the previous one. Now, granted, this is the 8th one. You know, like the burnout is real. But like even for the last one that came out, number 7, like I didn't like it. And I felt bad that I didn't like it. Like my response walking out of the theater is like, I'm really bummed that I didn't like that more. You know, and so
I'm bummed for you because I had a great time.
Yeah. And so I wonder if there's a lot of people like me who are going into 8 with like their fingers crossed going like, come on, Tom, you can do it, you know.
Yeah.
But
that's another one that has like some interesting marketing, I will say, because like that there was a trailer played before Sinners, and I noticed that I wonder if they're hiding something. And not in a bad way, but it seemed like the trailer that played like right before Sinners was a lot of reused footage from the other Mission Impossible movies, and really leaning into like it all culminates to this. And it made me wonder, like, surely like is there some like big crazy sequence that they're like not showing us, or
I think so. I think they learned their lesson in the last movie where they made the big like motorcycle jump.
Yeah.
That was the climax of the movie, like the heart of all the advertising. So that by the time it finally happened, we're like, we saw this a lot already.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that they would want to hide something. So you've got that aspect. And to go back to what you were saying about kids' movies, not only is it we've got to get kids out of the house, it's think about all of these day camps that kids are going to be in, where all of these schools need field trips. And
spoken like a true teacher here.
Yeah, and you're also talking about, like, we're talking about Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon as relatively modern movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lilo and Stitch came out in the early 2000s. So the kids who watch that are now adults with their own kids.
That is
How
true.
to Train Your Dragon is the first movie I watched at home on DVD after my daughter was born. Like a couple days after she came home from the hospital, she was taking a nap. I'm watching How to Train Your Dragon. So like the kids who were barely here when that movie came out can almost drive now.
Yeah.
So you're seeing
which is a big part to the Minecraft success.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
Think
and so,
you know, a generation of kids that grew up with that, playing that game.
And so you've got to think about how, you know, to age myself, you know, is this going to be their version of Michael Keaton Batman? This thing where it's the first time I get to see a quote real version of this on the screen. And you know, we'll see, but I think that those are sort of like kind of hidden time bombs that could upend everybody's predictions. Like it could be a thing where, you know, they do solid business and it makes shareholders happy, or it could be a thing where we're like, oh my God, where did this come from?
Yeah. So what's a movie, maybe to get a little darker, what's a movie that you think will be the big bust of the summer that maybe people don't see coming, but that you're getting some weird vibes from? Should I just drop my hot take right here?
Yeah, I've got a couple that I'm trying to narrow it down, so you drop your hot take, and then we'll see if we're on the same page.
For the sake of content, I'm going to say Superman.
Oof, yeah.
In general, you know, we talked about that compared to Fantastic Four. I will say I'm sensing some genuine excitement among people for Fantastic Four. Does that mean it's going to be good? I don't know, but I think people love that cast, and I think there's an excitement of people being like, Marvel hasn't adapted this major comic yet. Like, there's been Fantastic Four movies prior, but like no one really likes them. And this being a sort of like, oh, okay, can we finally get like there seems to be a sense of people being like, okay, maybe they've like actually nailed down what works about those comic book characters in a movie. And compared that to Superman, where I feel like among just the normal people in my life, I think there's a bit of skepticism about Superman. And I don't think it's this sort of like Snyder bro, you know, stuck up attitude of like, not
let's
my
review-
Superman. Where's Henry Cavill? I think it's
let's review bomb this on Rotten Tomatoes.
No,
kind of
I think it's genuinely a like. It hasn't been that long in the grand scheme of things since we got a version of Superman, and I will say, if you look back at the box office for a lot of the Superman movies, Superman, while a very big character, is not always like box office like gold.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the Superman movies, I think there's sort of a mixed feeling about them, and I can sense a little bit of people being like, didn't we just reboot Superman? That like even though you could say like, well, the Henry Cavill Man of Steel, like that was 2012, 2013, whenever that was, it feels recent for people, and I could see a little bit of hesitation in being like, are people going to jump on board to like, I now have to fully memorize like another franchise comic book world? Like, I wonder if this is coming just a little bit too late for DC and Warner Brothers, and whether that's the thing that people are interested in hopping on again, of like, look, the Marvel movies, they're not all perfect, but like, did that they just luck out of being like, they were first up to bat, and most of them for a good 10 years were at least like solidly fun, and that, you know, they captured that moment, but now people are sort of burnt out on that thing. And now here's Warner Brothers coming along being like, here's our second attempt at doing this, and aren't you excited? And I'm just getting a lot of kind of like, even though I hope that movie's good, maybe it'll be fun. I like James Gunn, but I don't know about you. I am sensing a bit of hesitation with people of being just sort of like, I don't know that I need another Superman movie. Like, I think I'm good. I get it, and like, it doesn't feel like it's been that long since the last time we like rebooted Superman.
I could see that, especially since you have the not that it was like a ratings juggernaut or anything, but you have the Superman and Lois show that just wrapped up on
That's
TV,
true.
which a lot of genre fans consider one of the best versions of Superman that there's been, which granted almost nobody watched. But so if you have this hardcore Superman contingency that's like, we just saw it wrap up in a really good way. We've seen it done even more recently than the Henry Cavill. Then you've got your core demo of people going, you know what? I think we're good for a while. So you could have some danger from both directions.
Superman content that then now Warner Brothers saying like, and here's another one, but we're starting from the beginning. Are people just going to be like, as you said, like, I'm good. I've seen so many versions of Superman in the last several years. And you know, if you look back at the box office, like I think the highest grossing Superman movie, it's Batman versus Superman. Like, it's the one that also had Batman in there for the marketing, and of like Man of Steel. I remember that coming out and people being like, that's going to just own the summer. And it came out and it did pretty well, but it wasn't like, it didn't own the summer. And I remember a similar feeling when, what's the Bryan Singer one, when that came out, of people just being like,
Superman Returns.
That's just going to be like, it's Superman. It's just going to like wipe the floor clean and just obliterate everything else around it. And it kind of didn't. And
you have to remember too, like, even, you know, I say OG Superman, like, let's say like sort of modern era Superman, even the Christopher Reeve Superman
ones,
you go back and like the only one of those four to really do truly great was the first one.
Yeah,
you know, I know
and it was because it was like, it's the first time Superman has been in a movie.
And if you go back and watch it now, I love Christopher Reeve. I love Christopher Reeve as Superman. The movie itself is really bloated. Christopher Reeve doesn't show up until an hour in, you know, and so
I'm gonna rewatch all of those. That's gonna be my project before the James Gunn one comes out, because I've truthfully only ever seen the first two Christopher Reeve ones, and I haven't seen them since I was a kid. Like, I watched them like once on TV and was like, fun. I like Superman, and then I've like never revisited them as an adult.
Yeah, and they're perfectly solid movies. You know, I don't want it to feel like I'm, you know, killing Santa Claus here or anything, but you know, but I think people now who go back and rewatch those original Superman movies are going to find them like quaint and dated, even though at the time we're like, I mean, the tagline was like, "You will believe a man can fly,"
Right.
which we're like now we're like, that's every movie, you know.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is having to, if you do go back and revisit it, it's trying to watch it through those 70s goggles, not like your 2025 lenses, to see why it was such a big deal. But yeah, I think Superman has had a traditionally tricky time at the box office. So yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all if you end up being right about this one.
Are there any others that you're sensing kind of a little bit of like, I don't know that this will work, and I want to preface again, like, I hope Superman's good. Like, I would love nothing more than like a kick-ass Superman movie, but that seems like a movie that costs a lot and is like Warner Brothers has a lot riding on it. Yeah. And I'm just not sensing from even non-movie snob people like us, like just generic people in my life, I'm not sensing a whole lot of like, oh, I can't wait for Superman to come out.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm hearing a lot of like, didn't that just come out? And you're like, well, no, we've had multiple Batman in that time. We've had multiple Spider-Man in that time. But yeah, it does feel like, yeah, we just had this, even though that's not the case. So I've got a couple, and from a selfish aspect, and this sounds evil, right? I could see it being the new Jurassic World movie.
Interesting.
And part of it is just because I'm like, we need to leave this alone for a little while. And I know Universal's not going to do that.
Really feeling like the leftovers from like 3 weeks ago that we're just like reheating.
Yeah, and it, and I know Universal is like, well, we're not going to leave money on the table. Like, even though the last 3 were garbage, they still made billions of dollars. We're not just going to walk away from that. But for people who like creative storytelling, it just feels like you said, you're just like rewarming the same bowl of soup over and over and over again. Even though, Wicked made me a big fan of Jonathan Bailey. Love Mahershala Ali. Scarlett Johansson, hit or miss these days. But everything about this movie just screams paycheck movie to me, or let's check this off the list. And even the trailers are sort of making fun of the premise where Mahershala Ali is like, it's like, yeah, nobody patrols these islands because nobody's dumb enough to go. And it's like, yeah, but guess who's gonna be? Like, and so from a creativity standpoint, something tells me that one might underperform. But I don't know. Same thing with kids. Never underestimate the power of like 12-year-old boys and dinosaurs.
Yeah, nothing travels and sells across the globe like it's dinosaurs. And as I'm with you, I kind of like am so done with the Jurassic movies. I even like on the plane ride back from Greece, like fired up the first one and was just like, oh my god, this is so good. Like none of the other movies can touch this.
Well, I was gonna say, like we're seven movies into a franchise where there's only been one genuinely good movie.
Yeah, but even still, like all of the Jurassic Park movies, every time one comes out, it's a huge hit, and it gets back to that thing of just like dinosaurs. It sells.
Dinosaur eat people, that cool, it's that primal thing. But so there's that one. The one that just from a pure mathematical, like facts and figure standpoint, the one thing that I just cannot see being successful is F1.
That's the other one other than Superman that I'm sort of like, I'm really excited for that movie, but that also that feels like another big gamble movie of Apple being like, can we generate another Top Gun Maverick in like, let's get the same director. It's instead of we strap cameras to fighter jets, it's we strap cameras to race cars. We can't get Tom Cruise, who's another kind of like veteran, sturdy movie star who we can get. Brad Pitt, throw him in there, and let's see if we can recreate the magic. And it looks awesome, but
I will be there to see it.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, like a very, very expensive movie that
this is $300 million plus, right?
Yeah, that can can you regenerate the Top Gun Maverick phenomenon, or is that just a sort of like it was the right combination of a movie that, like, a sequel to a movie that there was the right amount of nostalgia for, plus it was like right as people were comfortable going back to the movies after the pandemic, and like is it going to just be like you can't, that was just a sort of like perfect circumstances for that movie to become a phenomenon, regardless of like how good the F1 movie might be?
Yeah, I think everything you just said is yes. Like, I think Top Gun Maverick was a perfect storm. I think there's a lot, like, even looking at the trailer for F1, it made me think, was this supposed to be Days of Thunder Maverick?
Yeah.
You know, because even back in the day, Days of Thunder, they're like, it's Top Gun with race cars. You know?
Exactly. And that's a perfect comp, actually.
Yeah, and so they were like, did this start? It's sort of like The Pit and ER, right? Did this start as a Days of Thunder Maverick? But then Tom Cruise was like, I want to finish up Mission Impossible, so they just retrofitted it to be, you know, Brad Pitt as an older, washed-up race guy who has to train the hot-headed young phenom, and then you have, like, Javier Bardem as, like, seems kind of like the Iceman guy, and so
or in the John Hamm role is like, I'm gonna be the boss person that's just gonna like roll my eyes and be like, darn you.
I'm here to ruin the fun, you know. So it feels like it's hitting all the same beats, which, you know, those are successful beats. Who knows? You know, there's a reason tropes work, you know, but is it going to work to overcome this significant budget? And I know that for most people that should, and even for us, that should not be the things going on in our head when we sit down to watch a movie. But, you know, it just feels like all the math is working against this one. Does that mean I want it to bomb? No, I never want anything to bomb. Like, unless it's just something that if it bombs, it sort of like kills off something that's destroying creativity. You know?
It is genuinely one of the blockbusters this summer I'm most looking forward to. Yeah. And the trailer looks sick, of just sort of like, they put cameras on race cars. Like, like, I'm there.
And it's also like, is this the first full-blown movie star performance we've gotten from Brad Pitt since Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? I know we had Wolves,
true, but
that felt like it, and Wolves was solid. It was fine.
Get out of here! That movie was like a Nespresso commercial. I detested that movie.
But I mean, you know, I sat there for 2 hours and I was like, "Yep, they're good looking and charismatic," which is what they were going for, you know. Yeah. But I feel like this may be the first chance Brad Pitt gets to be Brad Pitt since Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So we'll see if he still has that magnetism.
Well, I wish we had extra time that I could just talk with you about The Pit, because I'm really enjoying it. It's like one of the best things It's so good.
I'm so far behind on TV, and me and my wife never watch TV together anymore just because our tastes have evolved to be different. And that's the one that we're sitting down to watch together, and it's really hard not to binge it. Like, we're on episode 10 now.
It's become my like comfort food binge show, because like I don't know all the medical stuff they're talking about, so I could just sort of like have it on in the background as I'm cooking and stuff. But it is funny how much it is just sort of like, oh, it's ER, like it's all come full circle at this point.
So much so that there's lawsuits, right? But it's something that like we get a chance to do together, so we're trying to stretch it out and make it last. And and I think it speaks to this era we're in, where it's like, oh, smart people doing things competently. Yes, please, we need that.
So the last question regarding summer movies is, what do you think will be kind of the surprise of the summer?
I'm hoping, again, if we're being selfish, I'm hoping it's Life of Chuck.
Interesting. Yeah, that'll be an interesting one. I will say my girlfriend is like a huge Mike Flanagan fan, and like
same
is like that's like the next movie. She's like, when is that coming out? But yeah,
and I feel like
it'll be interesting if that like becomes you know, it's Neon's definitely marketing that is like, this is Stand By Me. It's Shawshank Redemption. This is pull on your heartstrings Stephen King, not horror Stephen King. And that'll be interesting to see if that, you know, pans out.
And plus, as somebody who also likes Mike Flanagan, I feel like he's been on the verge for so long. And I need this to do well so that he can finally get to do the Dark Tower. But also, the next thing he has on board is an Exorcist movie, and not to count out Flanagan, right? But I would much rather his breakthrough be for something like Life of Chuck than like another Exorcist movie. The big question mark, as somebody who's read the story it's based on, is how audiences are going to feel about how the film plays out.
I've heard it is weird, for lack of a better word, or it is unconventional in the way that it's
unconventional.
Told.
It's a little metaphysical, and so I think people who are just looking for like a Shawshank or something, may be surprised at what they get. Hopefully, not disappointed in what they get.
And yet, it won the audience award at TIFF, which is usually like is less a badge of quality and more of a badge of sort of like a certain type of crowd pleaser, if that makes sense, of a sort of like feel good movie. So I don't know. That's a good pick. Mine that I'm gonna throw out. You know, it's a big summer for horror movies. There's a lot of kind of horror Lego sequels and stuff. I'm gonna throw my chips down for Weapons, the Zach Kreger movie, the guy who made Barbarian. You know, there's only like a little teaser about this movie that's been out. It seems like Warner Brothers is going to kind of market this in sort of maybe similar to kind of the way Neon marketed Longlegs last summer, of being a sort of like, let's slowly like trickle out stuff. It's coming out in August, so like near the end of the summer, where usually like there's plenty of room for like an August movie to kind of like surprise and clean up.
Not a lot of competition.
But yeah, I think horror movies are usually like pretty easy layups if they're good, and Barbarian, Kreger's first movie, was kind of this real word of mouth success, and
there's a lot of fun too.
Yeah, and so I could see if Warner Brothers markets this in a similar way as to Barbarian, and this becomes a kind of like word of mouth hit. I really know nothing about it. It seems to involve like missing children, and that's all I really know about it.
When I heard, like, I've made it a point not to read anything, because the first thing I heard was Magnolia but horror, and I was like, I'm done, I'm out.
Yeah.
No, I know
Josh Brolin and Julia Garner are in it, but that is one where I'm like, I could sense a sort of late summer kind of like word of mouth hit in a similar way to like was Barbarian, was that a summer? Because I didn't see it like until months after it came out, so I can't totally remember. One of those, but
it was also one of those
like,
that
like word of mouth, like people just saying like, you got to go see this. Like I can't spoil it for you, but like you need to see this and have some sort of like mystery hook to it.
I think most of that audience found it on Max later.
Okay, that's where I watched it.
Same here. And so that may be a big question mark on this too, is how many people watch this at home, loved it, but they're not really accounted for in the financial stuff. How many of those are going to be like, oh, it's the Barbarian guy, and go out to see it? So yeah, I'd be super happy if that, if that was the case as well. So.
Well, Josh, we'll have plenty of time to talk about those summer movies and more. Hopefully we'll have Jason back soon. Next week, I assume we will dip our toes back into the Marvel waters and talk about Thunderbolts. I'm also going to try and see the new David Cronenberg movie, which I'm really excited for. I would love, whether you guys get a chance to see it or not, us to maybe do a like favorite Cronenberg movies.
Yeah. So I saw
segment.
The first 30 minutes are really good, and then my screener crapped out, and it's one of those where you only get a limited amount of views.
Oh, boo!
So first 30 minutes were really good. I liked it.
I've heard, I've talked to some people who said they like found it a little bit cold, but then like the real like Cronenberg auteurs have been telling me like no, this is like a pretty like major like late period work from him. So I'm excited to go check it out this weekend, hopefully.
So yeah, maybe that was the universe's way of telling me to stop watching and see it on the big screen. You know?
Yeah, there you go. There you go.